California's exodus narrative is shifting, and in 2026, one of the biggest surprises is that some former residents are moving back, not just for jobs or weather, but because rents are actually cheaper than they were a few years ago. In 2025, California still lost hundreds of thousands of residents overall, with net domestic migration deeply negative and out-migration statistically higher than in-migration. But buried in that data is a quieter trend. More people are returning than in the early pandemic years, and a growing share of renters are choosing to stay in California rather than flee the state. At the same time, rents in some of the biggest metros, especially Los Angeles, have retreated to levels not seen in about 4 years. That mix of softening prices, tightening rent increase caps, and stabilizing vacancy rates is quietly reshaping who returns, where they land, and how they play the California housing market. To understand why some people are returning, you have to remember why they left. Over the past decade, housing in California has consistently run around 50 to 60% higher than the national average, making both buying and long-term renting a stretch for many middle-income households. In 2025, the cost of living in California was about 12 to 13% above the U.S. average, with housing as the single biggest driver. On top of that, ownership costs on a typical California home have surged along with mortgage rates, pushing full monthly payments for a median-priced home well over $5,000 in many areas. That environment made it rational for many families and young professionals to move to lower-cost states like Texas, Arizona, or Idaho. Headlines in 2025 and early 2026 keep calling it an exodus, and the numbers back that up. California lost roughly 216,000 residents net between July 2024 and July 2025, following an even larger loss the year before. Domestic migration, the difference between people leaving and those coming from other states, remains negative, consistent with California's pattern over the last decade. But international migration is still strong, and in-state moves are shifting the picture even more. A recent report shows that many California renters are no longer looking to move to other states. Instead, they're searching for new cities within California, such as moving from San Jose to San Francisco or other in-state metros. In other words, people are trading one part of California for another, rather than fleeing the state entirely. So what's drawing people back, especially in a market that's still expensive overall? One big factor is that the affordability arbitrage they found in states like Arizona or Texas is shrinking. Housing prices in some of the most popular California escape destinations rose sharply during the 2020 to 2022 surge, which means the gap between California costs and nearby states is narrower than it used to be. At the same time, lower mortgage rates and a more stable job market make California's wage premium look better again. Tech, entertainment, and professional services wages in California still tend to outpace most of the country, and for many workers, the cost-benefit calculation has shifted back towards staying or returning, especially if they can lock in a lower rent than they left behind. The most concrete reason for the reverse exodus vibe is what's happening with rents. In Los Angeles area markets, the median rent dropped to about $2,167 per month in late 2025, the lowest in 4 years. That's not cheap by national standards, but after years of double-digit annual increases, it feels like a real reprieve to many renters. Los Angeles County actually shrank by about 28,000 people in 2025, even as new apartments came online, pushing vacancy rates above 5% and giving landlords more incentive to hold or even cut rents. In some submarkets, landlords are now offering incentives such as a month free or move-in credits, which further soften the effective cost of renting. Much of the inflow isn't going back to the most expensive coastal cores. Instead, returning residents and in-state movers are landing in lower-cost submarkets, particularly in the Inland Empire and parts of the Central Valley. Southern California forecasts show that Orange County, San Diego, and Ventura County are still seeing modest rent growth, but more affordable pockets like Anaheim, Santa Ana, and some Inland Empire cities are seeing slightly softer pricing and more inventory. That makes those areas attractive for former residents who want to stay in California, but are unwilling to pay the still sky-high prices in coastal San Diego or Westside LA. Even as some people return, many are choosing to rent rather than buy. California's median home price is still forecast to be around $900,000 in 2026, with ownership costs for a typical median-priced home running well over $5,000 a month once you include principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. By contrast, rents in certain metros, especially at the lower end of the market, have not yet rebounded to their pandemic-era peaks, which means the gap between buying and renting is still wide and, for many, renting is the rational choice. That dynamic is especially powerful for younger professionals, gig workers, and those who want flexibility while waiting for prices or rates to cool further. Another reason rents feel more manageable is that California's rent cap laws remain in effect through mid-2026. Under AB 1482, most multi-unit rental properties built more than 15 years ago are subject to annual rent increase caps of 5% plus local CPI, or 10%, whichever is lower. In many counties, the practical cap is around 6 to 7%, which is far below the double-digit increases seen a few years ago. Some cities and counties add local rent control or even stricter caps on top of that, which further limits how much landlords can raise rents year over year. These rules don't make California cheap, but they do provide a predictable ceiling and make it harder for landlords to jack up rents in a single year, which can feel like a relief for long-term renters and returnees alike. The role of politics, lifestyle, and soft pull factors. Beyond pure economics, there are softer but still powerful reasons people are coming back. California's cultural infrastructure, diverse neighborhoods, food, outdoor access, and relatively progressive policy environments remains a draw for many families and professionals. Some studies also suggest that political alignment influences migration. People who left California for more conservative states sometimes find that the local culture or policies don't fit, while those who identify as Democrats may still view California as their natural home, even if it's expensive. For many, that combination of lifestyle, climate, and values ends up outweighing a few extra dollars in rent. If you're already living in California, this trend is a reminder that the always more expensive every year narrative is pausing, not reversing. In many markets, rents are still higher than they were 5 years ago. They've just stopped rising at breakneck speed, and in a few pockets, they've actually dipped. But the shift does change the calculus for decisions like whether to move out of state, whether to stay in a current apartment, or whether to lock in a lease that's marginally below recent highs. For renters, it can mean more negotiating power on move-in incentives or longer-term leases at stable rates. For landlords, it suggests a tougher environment for big rent hikes and more competition for quality tenants. Looking ahead, the key question is whether cheaper rents become a long-term feature or a short-term pause. Forecasts through 2026 still expect modest rent growth in most Southern California counties, typically in the low to mid-single-digit range annually. Vacancy rates are expected to remain slightly elevated, but still tight by national standards, which means rents won't crash, but they also won't spike as they did between 2021 and 2023. If mortgage rates stay relatively low and housing starts continue to add supply, the pressure on rents could ease further, making California more attractive to returning residents and in-state movers. On the other hand, any shock to the job market, especially in tech, entertainment, or professional services, could reignite the exodus narrative and put upward pressure on vacancies in high-cost coastal areas. For you, this California exodus reversed angle is important because it flips the script from everyone is leaving to everyone is resorting. People aren't blindly running away from California. They're making nuanced trade-offs between cost, lifestyle, and long-term stability. If you're thinking about where to live, rent, or invest in California, understanding where rents are actually softening, where tenant protections are strongest, and where returnee demand is concentrated can help you avoid overpaying or overcommitting in the wrong submarket. And for anyone considering a move out of state, it's worth asking whether the so-called cheap markets you left for are still as cheap as they once looked. California's exodus story is real, but it's not the whole story. And the fact that former residents are returning for cheaper rent is a sign that the market is shifting, not simply collapsing. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button, subscribe to Housing IQ, and drop a comment with your city or suburb so we can dig into what's happening specifically in your local market.